The following program is from NET, the National Educational Television Network.
Peace again. The exquisite hour before dawn, here at my old desk. Seldom have I realized so fully these still, dark hours. I have some moments for writing, also much opportunity for contemplation, a chance to size up my work, and more especially, myself. But when I glance back over myself, speaking on such and such a day, I either snicker with amusement or see red. But write on I shall. I need to. I derive personal pleasure. It is my way of exploding, my way of self-indulgence, self-communing.
An artist's statement is in his work. Yet many artists have attempted to analyze their motives in writing. Painters like Da Vinci, Delacroix, Van Gogh, and more recently a photographer, Edward Weston. Weston's daybook reflects his view of himself, his doubts, his certainties, and above all, his constant growth. In 1920, he wrote,
Well, I know you, Edward Weston, and I say you have spent a year of writing and excusing your weakness. And yet, knowing all this, you are not strong enough to destroy most of your work, nor these notebooks.
But he did have the strength. He scraped the emulsion off old prize-winning negatives and used the glass for windows. In 1925, he threw 3 years of daybooks into the fire. 4 years later, he regretted it.
I am getting a clearer idea of the necessity which causes me to write. It is a way of learning, clarifying my thoughts. I know now that I should not have destroyed my daybook from 1920 to 1923. It contained a most important period of growth. My desire to destroy was natural. To look back over immature thoughts and excess emotion was not pleasant. The same will happen to this period. I pray for strength, not to destroy.
As Weston grew in scope and purpose, he found that strength. Many years later, when he contemplated publication of his daybook, he edited with razor blade and pencil, but eliminated only petty reactions, momentary moods, and names. In a letter to his editor, he wrote,
By the way, I have already written my introduction. Here it is. How young I was. That covers everything.
He kept a daybook for over 15 years, but his main tool was always the camera, and words came next. In the solitude of the early morning hours, facing himself over a piece of empty paper, a profound alchemy took place between his desire to analyze his failures and successes and the growing strength of his vision. Over a lifetime, he developed a medium that had once been regarded as quite inferior. He made visible to others those values to which he responded most strongly. Why he did this is only partially reflected in his daybook. Men often seem to perpetuate themselves through their response to beauty. He became known all over the world for his images and words, even to those who never dreamed that this is what a man can do, and with a camera.
Can I ever forget certain days? One of the earliest, in 1902, I was 16. The scene in a Chicago apartment, printing from my first negative made with a stand camera purchased with money saved penny by penny. And how I ran trembling with excitement to my father's library to show this snow scene made in Washington Park. My enthusiasm over these early prints did not last long. I soon realized that the trees were too black, the snow too white, and my struggle began, caused by dissatisfaction, to improve my technique. A long, tough struggle without help, for I was a bashful boy.
Weston's tough, long struggle began at the age of 16 with these Midwestern landscapes. It lasted a lifetime.
My education was not from the public schools where I dreamed my hours away, but from my camera. Before it came into my life, I had drifted along mechanically, but suddenly my whole life changed because I became interested in something definite, concrete. Immediately, my senses of sight and touch were developed. My imagination keyed to a high pitch because, at last, I became interested.
Throughout his youth and most of his adult life, he had to satisfy this overriding interest while struggling to make a living. He started as an errand boy at Marshall Fields in Chicago and worked his way up to general salesman at $10 a week. While visiting his sister, May, in California, he worked on a railroad. He decided to stay and to make his living at photography. He rang doorbells and took photographs of anything people wanted, babies and pets, brides and funerals, at $1 a dozen. In 1909, he married Flora May Chandler. Over a period of 10 years, 4 sons were born. But Edward and Flora Weston grew apart and separated in 1922. He did not ask for a divorce until 1938. In 1911, he opened his own portrait studio, where he worked with a large studio camera. The use of a soft-focus Verito lens pleased the vanity of his subjects, among them movie stars, and he soon became a fashionable portrait photographer and expert retoucher. Photographing his own children, he added a 3¼ by 4¼ Graflex to his equipment, which allowed him to capture their activities more freely. He became interested in the subtleties of natural light and worked more out of doors. By 1914, Weston was famous, received numerous medals and prizes, and was elected a member of the London Salon. Looking back at that period many years later, he wrote,
"The whole soft period, in retrospect, seems like a staged act. I even dressed to suit the part. Windsor tie, green velvet jacket. See, I was an artist."
Weston's biographer, Nancy Newhall, wrote, "When change came to Weston, it nearly always took the shape of a woman. He fell in love with Margaret Mather, who became the first important person in my life. Her involvement with music, literature, and philosophy stimulated his interest in contemporary trends. Like Weston, she was a photographer, and he made her a partner in his studio." Weston's second wife, Caris, evaluates this period.
I think that the strongest influence on Edward during his more fuzzy period was associated with Margaret Mather and the group of people around her who were, there was a preciousness and a love of what was called Japanesque. The approach to poetry, graphic arts, burning with a hard gem-like flame and all this sort of thing. And I think approximately at the time Edward made his trip east and came face to face with the Armco steel mills, that he just stepped away from this and shed it.
There seemed to be two forces warring for supremacy, for even as I made the soft, artistic work with poetic titles, I would secretly admire sharp, clean photographs in showcases of very mediocre photographers.
Weston ceased to send his work to pictorial exhibits. His vision was changing. He began to experiment with abstract motifs, fragments, and light patterns. In 1922, he went east on a family visit and was struck by new subject matter.
Most of all in importance was my photographing of Armco, the great plant and giant stack of the American Rolling Mill Company. That day I made great photographs.
A year before his trip to the East, Weston had met Tina Modotti, actress, model, and photographic apprentice. In 1922, she arranged a one-man show of his work in Mexico. It was enthusiastically received. In the fall of 1923, together with Tina and his oldest son, Chandler, he sailed for Mexico.
A long period of personal conflict was required before I finally decided to break away and leave my family for Mexico. To the outer world, I was a deserter, but I was not. If I had remained, I would have mentally poisoned all around me, destroyed them, my work, and myself. It wasn't easy to uproot oneself and part with friends and family. There were farewells which hurt like knife thrusts. But I adapt myself to change. Already Los Angeles seems part of a distant past.
Cole, Weston's youngest son, recalls this period.
When Dad went to Mexico in 1923, I was some 4 years old, that picture of me standing there, and I don't really realize what was happening except that my father was going away. At times I'd explain why I didn't have a father at certain times at school and so forth. I didn't have a father.
40 years later, when Weston's Mexican daybook was published by George Eastman House, Neil Weston could still recall the turmoil he had felt.
Well, I read the book that was published, and I just read it once and closed it, and I couldn't read it anymore. It hit me so hard that it was just terrible. I felt so upset that I've never opened it since. I don't know why. It was probably a very unhappy period of my life. And we wrote to him all the time, and he wrote to us, and we loved him dearly, and were just looking forward to the day that he came back. And it was a long time in between where we didn't see him, and we missed him very much.
We anchored at Mazatlan. We found life both gay and sad. Sharp clashes of contrasting extremes, but always life, vital, intense, black and white, never gray. Later, we were introduced to Mexican hospitality when we met the captain at noon for a cocktail. Strange how one can understand a foreign tongue with tequila in one's belly. I was tempted, in Mazatlan, to go tourist, making snaps of street scenes. But yesterday, I made the first negatives other than matter-of-fact records. Negatives with an intention. A quite marvelous cloud form tempted me. A sunlit cloud which rose from the bay to become a towering white column. Mexico, DF. The past still dominates. Old churches stand like impregnable fortresses, quite apart from the life which surrounds them. The pulquerias, bars in which the Indian finds solace for his lost glory, are the most colorful notes of contemporary life in the city. And the titles evidence the Indian's romance and his imagination. An old love, hope in the wilderness, the pearl of piety, death and resurrection. Imagine American saloons with such names. Perhaps if they had had them, we should never have voted the 18th Amendment. These paintings are the last word in direct, naive realism. One has in the Pulqueria the most fascinating popular art in modern Mexico City. I have photographed. All but one belonged to a romantic school not altogether in keeping with my present frame of mind nor attitude toward my work. I feel a battle ahead to avoid being swept away by the picturesque, the romantic. I should be photographing more steel mills or paper factories, but here I am in romantic Mexico, and willy-nilly one is influenced by surroundings. There are sunlit walls of fascinating surface textures, and there are clouds. They alone are sufficient to work with for many months and never tire. First exhibit at Aztec Land. I have never before had such an intense and understanding appreciation. And it is the men who come, 10 of them to each woman. And it is a relief after the average clubwoman of America who keeps our culture alive.
He used to tell about this with great enthusiasm. And this, I think, had a lot to do with his immediate feeling of being at home in Mexico and practically becoming a Mexican. And, you know, he stayed about half Mexican forever after.
Last evening, Diego Rivera visited the exhibit. Nothing has pleased me more than Rivera's enthusiasm. Looking at the sand in one of my beach nudes, he said, "This is what some of us moderns were trying to do when we sprinkled real sand on our paintings or stuck on pieces of lace or paper or other bits of realism." Yet, viewing my work day after day on the walls has depressed me greatly, for I know how little of what is within me has been released. My days pass monotonously enough, trying to make an ancient American woman dressed in a black mantilla look like a Spanish señorita. This jotting down of impressions helps to relax and prevents mental stagnation. I write a few words, then retouch a few wrinkles. Strange humor living from week to week in anticipation of the Sunday bullfight. The bull's horns in the horse's bowels. This was the ugliest and saddest part of the fight. The most spectacular, dramatic, and beautiful moment was the placing of the banderillos by Goana. And my reactions? Was it a cruel spectacle? Yes, undoubtedly. Though perhaps not so bad a way for a nation to release its sadistic emotions. Yes, I shall go again. I finished the portrait of Lupe Rivera. It is a heroic head. In direct sunlight I caught her, mouth open, talking, and what could be more characteristic of Lupe? Singing or talking, I must always remember her. I am only now reaching an attainment in photography that in my ego of several years ago I thought to have already reached. It will be necessary to destroy, unlearn, and rebuild. I took proofs to Lupe to show. Diego Rivera turned to Tina, remarking, "It bothers the painter to see such photographs." I wanted to catch Galvan's expression while shooting. The trigger to his Colt fell, and I released my shutter. I have caught fractions of seconds of emotional intensity which a worker in no other medium could have done as well. I see in my recent negative of the glass roof and stairway intellectual juggleries which presented no profound problem. I shall let no chance pass to record interesting abstractions, but feel definite in my belief that the approach to photography is through realism, and its most difficult approach. For what end is the camera used best? The answer comes always more clearly after seeing a great work of the sculptor or painter. that the camera should be used for a recording of life, for rendering the very substance of the thing itself, whether polished steel or palpitating flesh. Let me see f8 1/10 of a second K1 filter panchromatic film. How mechanical and calculated it sounds. Yet really how spontaneous and genuine, for I have so overcome the mechanics of my camera that it functions responsive to my desires. My shutter coordinating with my brain is released in a way as natural as I might move my arm. I might call my work in Mexico a fight to avoid its natural picturesqueness. Before leaving Los Angeles, I used to be almost angry with those who would remark, "Oh, you will have such a wonderful opportunity to make pictures in Mexico." Fascinating material to work with, the Oregon cactus in their stark severity. Sharper and sharper I stopped down my lens, the limit of my diaphragm. F32 was not enough, so I cut a smaller hole from black paper. How ridiculous a soft focus lens in this country of brilliant light, of clean-cut lines and outlines. Of course, I should add, how ridiculous the diffused lens in any country. I hear that I must have a marvelous lens or extraordinary camera, instead of a lens with shutter and all for 20 pesos and a camera quite gone to ruin. Not many realize that good photographs, like anything else, are made with one's brain. Tina and I went on another lark. We had our pictures taken. I was seated. Tina stood with her hand on my shoulder. To one side, a plaster Christ. It was all over before we knew it. Presto, and the church behind us changed into a spring landscape, the Christ to a beflowered pedestal, the last in which the romantic temperament of the Mexican reached a climax. Tina sat reading a book. At the critical moment, she was told to turn and gaze into my eyes. Click, click, and Exhibit A for a future divorce case was made.
In 1925, Brett Weston joined his father in Mexico.
Brett's net swishing through the air, butterflies captive in its meshes or sailing away to his chagrin. My joy was mostly seeing his. I have to be father, friend, teacher. I want to be, but not every moment of the day.
I was 13 years old and began photography there in the city of Mexico. My first exposures were there. And, well, that was an important phase of my life. I mean, life began there, you know. Well, my father was confined to his studio in Mexico City because, for business reasons. And he became desperate. He photographed juguetes and toys. And one day he, looking for something to do, he photographed this beautiful toilet, this elegant Grecian form. And he took his camera off the tripod to lower the camera, put it on the floor, and lay on his belly in the hallway, and the servants thought he was mad. We had a wonderful girl named Elisa, who was a criada, meaning servant, and she thought he was stark raving mad.
Not until I actually contemplated its image on my ground glass did I realize the possibilities before me. I was thrilled. Here was every sensuous curve of the human form divine, but minus imperfections. Diego Rivera, after his first exclamation, "In all my life I have not seen such a beautiful photograph," sat silently considering the print for many moments. This is more significant for me than any praise. The most pleasant compliment that a Mexican can give is to say that I have really felt Mexico deeply and sincerely. This compliment I have had on numerous occasions. I have sometimes written that I am in a fine creative mood, period. This is misleading. Peace of mind and an hour's time. Given these, one creates. Emotional heights are easily attained. Peace and time are not. Alfaro Siqueiros, painter, writer, radical, wrote a most intelligent article which, though directly concerned with my work, might be read as an exceptionally understanding treatise on photography. In Weston's photographs, the texture, the physical quality of things is rendered with the utmost exactness. The rough is rough, the smooth is smooth, flesh is alive, stone is hard. The things have a definite proportion and weight, and are placed at a clearly defined distance from one another. In one word, the beauty which these photographs of Weston's possess is photographic beauty. Before going to Mexico, the war was just over, and I am proud of my war record of non-support. I was embittered. This condition was intensified by discord at home. I was never fooled into thinking that Mexico was an escape, but it was necessary to go there, or somewhere, for readjustment, to gain perspective.
Mexico had served its purpose, and in 1926, Weston decided to return to the United States. Dodie Thompson, who studied with him 2 decades later, feels that his return was essential to his continued growth.
Well, of course, he was a Middle Westerner since he was born and raised in Chicago. And I think one of the things that drew him back from Mexico, rather than becoming an expatriate, as a number of other artists have done for various reasons, was the fact that he visually could see, he had already been introduced before he left to the bare bones of America, which can be seen so particularly clearly in Southern California area where he had been living and working. Whereas in Mexico, he found it almost too stunningly pretty to photograph.
The last chapter of Weston's Mexican Daybook reflects the end of an important period and new beginnings.
In trying to analyze my present work as compared to that of several years ago, I can best summarize by indicating that once my aim was interpretation. Now it is presentation. Also, I could now, with opportunity, produce 1 or more significant photographs a day, 365 days a year. Any creative work should function as easily and naturally as breathing.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.